I want to, while we're setting up here, I just want to say a quick thank you to our captioning team. This is the tech side of this, which I had no idea about, involves having to switch platforms and presentation modes, and there's captioning and there's live streaming and all of that kind of stuff. This is more than a couple of microphones, which is all I think about. So I really want to say thanks to the technical production that goes into this. I'm joined by Kyle Clark, who has had 5 introductions already today. We'll sit on opposite couches, but we'll sit next to each other. Is that your good side?
We'll test this.
You know what
the good thing is no matter how bad I do, you guys are obligated to give me a standing ovation, right?
That was my design. He's very clever. Jay,
we're thinking the same thing.
He's a professional in this business. So, Kyle, I'm not going to go into a long introduction because partly I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself a little because your story is part of what we're interested in. How does Vermont guy, dad, UVM employee for many, many years, worked in ITS, wind up back here with a big company all of a sudden, and when you had all the chances to get out. What's the story?
So I was just thinking about this on where to start if that question was asked, and I'm glad you brought it up. And I don't know if my mom and dad are here. They said they were coming by. Oh, hey. So my dad, he came to Vermont because of UVM. Yeah. In the 70s, and he worked in a building about 400 yards that way for nearly 50 years and just retired last fall. And he was half of my technological inspiration. He ran the instrumentation model facility and technical services program, supporting the research here, and supporting it with unique equipment, both electrical, fluid systems, mechanical systems. And it was core to my awareness of what's going on. And I guess the first point there being is that research out of university, the outcome of the research isn't just the product or the thesis or the data. It spreads throughout the community in many unforeseen ways. And we see it at Beta. We see it with the undergraduate students who have tickled the edge of the research community and people that are directly doing research like Paul Hines and others. And at the same time, my mother in the 70s she was an artist, or is an artist, and had a leather cart and a jewelry cart down on Church Street, built that into a little bit of business, and I can't even count how many businesses she started between then and now. Being an art teacher, what Jay was saying was inspiring and personally very close to me, and I feel like I was lucky enough as the start of Beta to have, or myself as a person even, to have a dad who was a dedicated, the hardest working dude I've ever seen at the university supporting the technical world, and a mother who was wildly creative and unafraid of just stepping from thing to thing and trying new things. And thanks, Mom and Dad. So that's where it started, and they encouraged me to build things, to build real things. And I heard people talking about, I love what I think whoever was just up on stage here, I forget the name already, said it's not a factory to produce the right student for an entrepreneur. You have to create the opportunities for people to find their own ways. And I had the short opportunity to teach the MA 185, 186 class here at UVM, which is a senior design course. And I encourage every senior to pick their project. When they pick it, they're more passionate about it, they expose themselves to things that they care about, and they learn things that are not prescriptive. Nobody else is picking their project. That's I think really important, a really important part of any educational flow that somebody goes through a curriculum here. So I had the opportunity to do that both at home, and then when I got to school, Beta was actually my senior project at Harvard. And I pursued that with the tools that I got from a tech school in Vermont. I went to Essex Tech Center and Essex High School. And I took the engineering and drafting curriculum there that had a bit of a stigma around going to the tech center and being a techie, as somebody else just said a minute ago. But that built into an opportunity to actually build real stuff. And I'm just recalling everything that was said today and the brand of Vermont. The Karen Cross once said, 1 foot in the pasture and 1 foot in the future. And it made a lot of sense at the time. And then I started thinking about, well, what is the brand of Vermont beyond like where we are progressively or politically or otherwise? It's a brand of doing real things. If you think about the bumper sticker when you drive through Jersey and it says, Jersey girls don't pump gas, I want to make a bumper sticker that say, Vermont girls have dirt under their fingernails. And you're doing real stuff. And this is the brand that we built our business around. It's doing real things in a tech environment where there's a lot of people talking about stuff and delivering relatively little. And every day we see another report on why the tech stock of some particular company doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make sense because there's no foundation underneath it. It's a house of cards, or it's a pretend thing. So Vermont's brand, and this is what Sharish and myself talked about over lunch one day, was how does the university become a nucleus for the brand of Vermont? And then, of course, the question gets elicited, what is the brand of Vermont? Is it agriculture? Is it cows? Is it tech? No, in my opinion, it's doing real things. So, one step forward in my story, this business was my senior thesis project, as I mentioned. I pitched it to everybody that would listen after winning the thesis of the year at Harvard, and nobody would invest in this airplane thing. So I started a business in parallel called iTherm with a couple other Vermonters after getting tapped by somebody who actually saw the thesis presentation. He was from New Hampshire, funded the business, came to Vermont, built that business, sold that business, built within another business, a second business. We sold that business and then started one fresh, and that has gone very well as well. And now we're in the early stages, ironically, with 600 people, of building another business in the state of Vermont. But I guess, the personal story to get there, I think, has been super informative to what values and strategy we apply within our business.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes a certain stick-to-itiveness to start business after business after business. You're either a slow learner or a fast learner. It's not short. So go back to dirt under the fingernails, though. I think, it's a metaphor because what has to be under your fingernails these days is changing so fast, right? And so we've talked about that some in the last panel. What are the kinds of, we talk about, Jeremiah mentioned Northeastern has a great co-op program. What are the things that people need to, should we be working on building more maker spaces on campus, or is that past? Do we, where are the places where people can get the new kind of dirt under their fingernails?
Yeah, I think celebrating the things that we want to be perpetuated is an obvious statement, and then applying that to things like tech schools and applying it to the brand that we're creating around Vermont. I just flew in from the Paris Air Show and got home about 3 o'clock in the morning this morning, and I was telling my wife Katie about what I saw when I was there, and we didn't have a booth there. We didn't spend a lot of money, we didn't make pretty videos, but I walked into the main hall of the Paris Air Show, and there's our airplane, right up on the wall, 2 big pictures of it. And we didn't pay for any of that. But that particular supplier who went onto our website, took a picture of our airplane, and made it the presentation of their leap into the future, was a product of us simply doing real things. Like we have these policies in our business. Never issue a photo rendering. Never make a CGI, and never tell somebody that you're going to do something until after you've done it, which makes it really easy. So there was a great quote the professor said a minute ago about predicting the future. And I have a very small processor in the back, so I can't remember all these. But I remember how it made me feel. And it made me feel inspired that, yeah, it's really easy to tell the truth when you talk about the past. So when we want to celebrate those things, what does that mean to Vermont and how we perpetuate that? Well, the UVM Math Prize, I remember participating in this, and I know I was a bit of a nerd, right? But the fact that we were celebrating like a sport a math prize at the high school was really cool to me. Celebrating people who make real things, like in FIRST Robotics and some of the stuff that's been hosted here at the university and at the high schools. We see that surfacing. Let's do more of that. It encourages people and kids to really engage with building real things and solving real problems, engaging in real business. I was out at the Linden Institute last week and walked down into their shop. And the level of investment relative to the level of productivity out of this the value was exceptionally high. They have kids going on a national stage showing both their technical welding skills and their artistic welding skills out of Linden, Vermont. And we need to celebrate. Why don't we all know about that? Geez, if our Little League team made it to the Little League World Series, the whole mine would be blown in the state, right? But we've got people going on the national stage showing off their artistic welding capabilities. It's that type of stuff that we need to celebrate more, both in education and, I mean, we're not all done being cooked, right? We still have a lot left to do. Let's do that for adults and people that are starting businesses and perpetuate it through celebration.
That's great. So, yeah. Good marching orders for the university. I think there's a lot there that we can build on. But so let me switch over to some about building Beta. This is not just a huge success story, but it's a particular kind of success story, and not just because it's in Vermont, but because you bring in experiential art. Everyone learns to fly. Your people come and go, have all kinds of flexibility. You've got our students out there. I can't stay, Professor. I'm going to run off. I've got to go fly this afternoon. Like, what is that? So, what's the people part of this? How much is that a part of your success?
Yeah, I mean, it is by far the most important thing that we focus on, the culture of the business. And everybody says that. And the culture of the business doesn't mean that you have a luncheon once a month and everybody gets together. Culture of the business doesn't uniquely mean that you celebrate art and people's passions outside of calculating the stiffness of a spar on a wing. It means that you holistically prioritize culture and the people within the business in every single decision you make. And I see Dwayne Peterson, one of my mentors, right over here on his computer, maybe taking notes. Are you taking notes? Good. All right. We're on the same page then. But folks like him who have identified culture as a very important part of the global decision-making process of a business. Yes, the art is really important. We want people who come to our business to leave feeling like they were in a place that was special. We want people to come every day as visitors, as employees, or whatever. And that culture is how people are interacting with each other. It's the physical spaces that we build. It's the art. It's the fact that we serve everybody lunch. And we don't do that just because it's slightly more efficient and it's totally a linear relationship between productivity and how much time people stay at the office. It's so that we have the unintentional collisions between people so they have empathy for the people they don't usually interact with. We have a lot of glass in our facility. Anybody that's been to our facility has seen there's a lot of glass there, and it's expensive. But the guy working on the brakes needs to look across and have a visual connection with the person working on the bearings and says, you know what, I'm going to design a product that's not going to put him in a corner or her in a corner. I'm going to design something because I see them every day. And this is like a proven statistical thing where that if there's empathy between teams and that empathy is generated through line of sight, through collisions, that the team creates more of a mechatronic device, especially in engineering where, and the definition of mechatronics, by the way, is multiple purposes at the same space and time. Nothing is more elegant than something that sits in one spot and you can't tell where the end of one thing is and the beginning of another thing is. It makes for less stuff. It makes simplicity. And it makes for a better product. And that's very technical and specific, but it's only generated when you break down what historically was called an ICD, an interface control document. You do this part and I'll do this part, we'll meet at the end, and we're certain to work together because we defined that early. And then you say, well, why did we even put a wire between those things? Why aren't they one and the same device? Why do we need a keypad on this? So the culture of the business is not removed from the technical success, the financial success, or the ultimate business success. And ultimately, what are we doing this all for, right? Why are we in business to begin with? Is it to get richer? No, it does. That's not it. It's because we want to spend our time doing something we really care about with people that we enjoy being around. Well, geez, with all the money in the world, you couldn't think of a better thing to do. Be around people you care about and love and do something that you love to do. So why don't you just make that as a business? And that's what we're creating with the culture at Beta. My wife Katie's right here. She's the one that helps to look at that through a different lens. And obviously she has a diverse vantage point, sometimes conflicting with mine and other people in the business. But if you appreciate it and you employ it and you prioritize it, not just superficially, but embedded in the decisions that are made every week, every day in the business, you end up with something that's your own and is culturally strong, and people are proud to be a part of it.
That's great. So, I mean, it sounds perfect. Why doesn't everyone do this is the first thing, right? I mean, if it sounds so obvious. But of course, it's hard to do everywhere. Are there things special about Beta's situation, that you have a startup culture, or that it's grown so quickly, that allowed you to really create the buy-in? Could you do this with a business that had been around for a long time?
It's funny. I was thinking about that when the head of the hospital was up here, and I was like, so we have this like prioritization of training people within the business before we start recruiting people from outside the business to come in. We increase the value, they have institutional knowledge, it feels good for everybody, and it's part of the culture of the business. Can you do that with doctors and nurses? To a certain extent, but it's harder in that particular thread. But that's not, like, back to the point that culture isn't defined by one particular thing that you do. Not everybody's going to offer free flight lessons to all their employees, right? It just doesn't make sense in certain businesses. But that's what it was for us. And the undertone of that is a connection with the mission of the business, the prioritization of the people within the business, prioritization of their training, making sure that they get to express what they love to do. And, it's not surprising. A lot of people who come to an aerospace company already love aerospace, right? So it's different in every sense. And I remember when we were like 40 people, and people said, look, when you get to 100, how are you going to keep this culture? And then the conversation at 100 was, wow, this is really good. How do we keep it to 300? When it's at 300, how do you keep it to 600? And now the question is, for the next 600 people that we hire, how do we keep that culture? And I don't know, but we're going to figure it out by passing every decision through a prioritization of the people within the business, the culture of the business, and a couple of those values that become really driving to the culture of the business. So I think it's crap if anybody says, well, I can't apply that. I make soap, or I make capacitors, or whatever. No, if you can apply that. I'll give you one example. We're moving to manufacturing, and we just are opening the doors, and we moved our first equipment in. Thanks, Keith. This is an employee who's been project managing this whole thing. When it's complete, will be the largest net zero building east of the Mississippi. There's one building bigger. It's owned by Amazon out west, here in Vermont, and that'll be awesome. We're moving into the first phase of that building. If you haven't seen it down on Williston Road, that's a good thing, because we tried to make it a little bit humble. You walk in on the second floor, which is really like the third floor. It's like this building from the front. And it doesn't look as big as it is, and it's part of our brand. It's part of our, like, hey, do things humbly, do real stuff. And people say, how do you keep the culture in there? And the architects that we're working with, they started to propose a bunch of different ideas. We're in manufacturing. Well, let's make a skylight down the whole center of the building. It feels like this. You've got real natural light. Let's choose LEDs that'll make it have this diurnal cycle so people don't get all depressed and down about things. Let's make it so that the people that are building the product and the engineers who are doing the manufacturing quality and other such things actually have to intersect. We put one coffee machine in there. Anybody puts another coffee machine in another corner, I'll come on the weekend and throw it out. We make them have to come to the same spot, so they intersect and they generate empathy for each other. And so you do these little things in a different way, in a different place, but the commonality is you pass the importance of empathy and collaboration and people above the other decisions that you make. It's more expensive to put skylight in. We get a little bit less solar because we do it, but it makes people feel better coming to work, and that was a priority we made.
Yeah, it's great, and it shows. I mean, people can't wait to work there. So, a lot of times you hear, well, it's going to be hard to compete in a state like Vermont. We're so far from the major metropolis. We're so far from capital. But you've been able to attract investment, following up on some of this. How much of the sort of growth and scaling that we were talking about earlier is a challenge for Beta? You've been able to stay and are determined to stay. Is finding the financing the challenge, or is it the talent things we talked about earlier, or is it other kinds of things?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a funny paradox. The people that are deploying the capital will look for a management team, and they'll look for names on a pitch deck and all that kind of stuff. They'll say they are, but what they're looking for is insight. They want to be insightful about something, so give them a place to be insightful. And so when people ask me, like, why do you do this in Vermont? Is there not a talent pool or whatever? And my answer is, why would I do it anywhere else? This is an awesome place to work. We have all these strategic advantages. Shh, don't tell anybody. And like all, they're like, oh, well, tell me more. We have access to our delegation that are making decisions on a national level. We have access to the governor. We've got the president of the university inviting us to come to things like this, having lunch with them, having like ideas banging around. We end up with this outsized strategic position on the kind of governmental side and the association side. And then, these blockers, much like the culture question, when people say, how do you find enough people? How do you, in a town, city, of 40,000, 42,000, how do you hire 1,000 people? That just doesn't make sense. But if you look at it from a slightly different perspective, you say, geez, there's 300,000 people here, but guess what? There's 700,000 people in the state. We're not exclusively looking at our work at Burlington. Like, we're trying to expand to Caledonia. We've got Habitat for Aviation going up in Franklin County. Like, we're putting infrastructure down in Rutland. We're touching the different corners of the state. And then, of course, the next question is, well, those are separated from each other. Well, we have magic airplanes. Like, it's kind of I was over in Caledonia last week, and 13 minutes, Burlington to Caledonia County, right? You can barely get across town here with that. And you want to hear a neat stat? We have people who really care about sustainability, so they self-litigate about the sustainability of our activity as a business. When we fly one of our electric airplanes, we have these small little commuter trainer airplanes from Burlington to Plattsburgh to our flight test center, versus driving a Tesla. Set the bar relatively higher. It's still more sustainable than driving a Tesla. And so when we collapse all these different sites through aviation, it actually brings the state together. It's like the physical equivalent of broadband, right? You can get people together to share ideas and be together because you've created a new mode of transferring knowledge and people. And if you can do that in an ethical and sustainable way, I think that you're onto something, right? So you start to explain this to investors. Yeah, I think it's crazy that they've trusted me with nearly $1 billion, right? And it's silly. And that $1 billion comes in here. Most of it stays in Vermont because we're doing pretty much everything we do in Vermont, whether it's through the construction company and the 200 people at the site right now working on stuff, or even the supply base that we're trying to keep relatively tight for strategic regions, by the way, not for like, hey, we have so much pride and we're dogmatic about being Vermonters. It stays here, and it cycles, and we apply that to, and I know I'm going off topic here, and I'll come right back around. When people come to Beta, and I heard about something about poaching people from company to company, we don't really see it that way, and I'll tell you, for the 2 years before Beta stuck, and I got our first customer. I sponsored teams here at UVM in the senior design course to do elements of the Beta design. And this gal, Anna, and this guy, Jake, were the leaders of those teams. And by the way, both of them now work at Beta. And I probably am stepping over too far by telling this story, but I'll slightly obfuscate the person. One of those people came for the first year and a half of Beta, and then came to me and said, I'm going to go start my own thing. And I said, that's awesome. How can I help? And we did, and we stayed very close and took off, started another thing, a machine learning business. It started to do well, but it wasn't quite the same as being at Beta, and now they work back at Beta, and they came back. And we've had a number of people who have left, and we've actually helped fund their business as they've taken off, because that ecosystem around us, it helps us at Beta. It helps build that base of people and knowledge and expertise and brand. I was flipping through Apple News the other day, and it said Bozeman, Montana, and Burlington, Vermont. Why are these? And I'm thumbing through, and I see a picture of our airplane, which is kind of cool. And I keep going through, and it's like, it's not just Russ Scully starting Hula. He believed in us, by the way, and he was the very first person who believed in us in the investment community right here in Vermont. It wasn't like somewhere else. And then he brought Davis's, the guy that I think paid for this building, and then John Abley, and like these guys are Vermonters that care about what we're doing, and they gave us the financial legs to take the next step and the next step and the next step. So being a part of that ecosystem is not separate from the funding of the business. And being good to people that come to you and say, I want to go and try something else, and you give them a high five and you say, how can I help? And you sit down with them and you have coffee with them and you work out the plan, and lo and behold, it has a return. But you have to think a little long-term, a little more long-term. Funding hasn't been an issue. Again, like the brand of Vermont, the brand of the business are together. People are aware of this stuff. I think it's the place where the university can be just a phenomenal nucleus of the brand of Vermont. And again, in my opinion, it's being a socially conscious business. It's being forward-thinking and progressive on environmental and sustainability and gubernatorial governance of the business. And all those different things, sometimes they're overshadowed by sustainability, is the brand of Vermont. And that's like the focal point of the economic world right now. Yeah. So let's leverage the snot out of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so what I'm hearing in the background too is part of Beta's riding a wave that Vermont could ride well, right? Is that the cultural part, the sustainability part, but also the economic and social governance part you just brought up, and there's enough happening here as part of the ecosystem. But you're looking that you have to continue to build that ecosystem. What can the university do in that space? I mean, we've talked a little bit about internships and senior projects. You're every day thinking about how do I build an ecosystem around Beta that's capable of allowing Beta to really be successful. What's a university's role in something like that?
Yeah, I think supporting those internships. Somebody mentioned co-ops before. You know, interns are valuable for 8 weeks, but there's a spool up time and all that kind of stuff. Giving the flexibility for longer internships. We have, I think, 80 interns right now this summer. And they'll come and they'll go. And some of them will stick around, some of them won't. We have a relatively high hiring rate out of that, which is good for us and good for the students, of course. But given a little more flexibility to build that through the year and get access, you know, even if it's just tangentially to the research and or the faculty here, to help support those students in whatever they're pursuing. And I know that causes a muddy area around IP and other such things, but it can be solved pretty easily. So just building on that and softening the edges to allow to unbox the scope of an internship is one. I think real hands-on stuff in whatever curriculum we're doing, whether it's the arts or engineering or humanities, real hands-on work that is applicable to business. You learn all these things that are you didn't expect to learn by exposing yourself to the real problems. You want to be a composer and write a song behind, like we have do some in need at Beta. When we have like a memo to send out to people, a lot of time Katie's team will put it into an art form, whether it be a rap or a poem or a music video or a funny poster or whatever, and it sinks in. But we need composers, and we need artists, and we need other people to do that. And seeing those projects from start to finish and realizing that it's not just about the art, it's then communicating things, it's the digital assets, it's the, you know, whether you're working with a budget or not. And those types of things are not learned in a project in school so much. So recognize that and exploit it. I think at a state level, never mind the university, we have to really bump up our tech schools. We've got to give them a shot in the arm. It's a place where people can naturally express what they love to do if they're makers, for example. A makerspace is great, but if a student like myself can sidestep some of the academic stuff and really just get passionate and care about stuff, you start to love education, and then you realize why you need to go back and get the theoretical stuff right, because you have to apply it and you want to advance whatever you care about over here. It's really a nice relationship. So we should unblock those a little bit.
The president mentioned earlier some of the sort of increased emphasis on startups coming out of the university, and this is something that we have really turned a lot of attention to. Is startups part of that collaborative work that we can do with Beta? I mean, the more we know about what things you need, the more that we can potentially spin out some of that ecosystem with you. Does that fit in as well as talent?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, startups is like a mindset. Who's going to define when it starts and when it ends, right?
I'm going to do that at lunch.
What's that?
Actually, I do that later in the day.
Oh, good,
No,
good.
So you'll be glad to know. Solved.
So yes, the entrepreneur. What does it mean to be an entrepreneur? It means making decisions when there's no playbook. It means applying like really generic game theory to problems and figuring out whether or not you're onto something or not, and self-litigating against that, because you don't get natural feedback until you start doing something, and sometimes you could decide to do something before you can get that feedback. So there's a lot of dimensions to entrepreneurship, and startups is like, I think it's got this like paint the walls orange, get a coffee machine and smoothies, and all of a sudden you're done, right? Then you got a startup culture. It's not. It's a mindset, and it's empowering people to not have to chase a career and like the philosophy of burning the boats. It's like it's one thing, and you can be like that directly literal translation of we're going to take the island, burn the boats, get no other option to go forward, right? Or you can spin it on its head a little bit and say, you can sail that back and use it for somebody else, because when I get here, I know that I don't have all the answers, but when I take the next step into the island, I'm going to figure it out because I have a certain number of tools to figure it out, and that's learned maybe through observation or internships or other things. I have some mentorship, like John Abley has turned into a phenomenal mentor of mine, and just spent a lot of time just absorbing his experiences. And I know there's more of that in places like Silicon Valley, but it's definitely here as well. So it's just empowering people to know that they will figure it out. That when you bump your head a couple times and you take a step back, Bradbury won't charge your rent down at VSET for 2 months while you get your feet underneath you. And then you start moving ahead. And it takes everybody to think like that and respect it. Not point at somebody and say you're a failure. It's like, hey, did you learn something? You ready to go at it again? Yeah, let's go at it again. And propping them up. I think the community can do a better job of that. I think that the university definitely can give people more of the tools. And there are some institutional things that we should put in place to enable the startups to happen here. Yeah. Tech transfer, I think, is a big one. Allowing students in the university to explore their passions and roll right into something. My daughter's girlfriend, she didn't go to UVM, and she wasn't able to start a startup because she sit there negotiating with RPI about who owns the IP. And I'm like, don't even bother with that. If you created IP, you can create more IP.
For the record, we have a no IP claim policy on all student work at UVM, so we got that going. Otherwise, I'd have to do that later in today, but we did that already. So, yeah, I think you're exactly right on the question about the sort of how to create a startup culture. Though there's always density questions, right? And I think this is some of what we're thinking about with Dominic Endicott coming and talking about knowledge towns later in the day, and it came up in Jay's conversation earlier about permission to fail. And you have this biography of serial entrepreneurship. And is that a Vermont thing that we, as a president mentioned this morning, that we continue to have folks who just this kind of Yankee stubbornness that are like, I'm going to do it myself and I'm going to do it again because it didn't work the first time. Is that something that Vermont can build on?
It is, but I think that it's not so much a stubbornness, it's a knowledge that it's going to be okay if I fail, right? And it's empowering to know that. When Joyce asked me to come and talk to the community college VCC graduation, I was sitting there like, just what do I say here? I really have nothing to say. I can't just tell another story. And I thought about like the community that you want to build around you, and I have it with Katie. Like if I say I'm going to go do this crazy thing, she rolls her eyes, but she never says don't do that. And then we start saying, well, what if I screw it up? What if this happens? And she's like, I don't know. We'll live in a bus and we'll have a great time with the kids. It doesn't matter. We'll still be here. And it's like empowering to know that she doesn't care if I fail. Of course, she's going to help me succeed. And as a community around entrepreneurs, knowing that, again, not labeled as a failure, that, hey, you tried that, good for you for trying. Yeah. I bet you learned a lot. hey, I'll bet that you have an edge over the next person because you know now what not to do. So there's, I think that providing that community support to entrepreneurism, is it a Vermont thing? Stubbornness, and just, I'm going to get it done? I think there's a little element of that. I think that there's I'm going to do it myself if nobody else is going to do it. Thinking like an entrepreneur a lot of the times is, and I remember quite vividly when I was talking to my dad when I was little, and he got put in as the boss of TPS or TSP down here at the university. I'm like, sweet, you got people to get you coffee and whatever. He's like, no, that just means that I have to do the stuff that other people don't do, right? Yeah. And an entrepreneur, recognizing that's their role, to kind of walk behind their entire team and pick up the pieces and move forward. That is something that I think Vermonters have a little more than others. Everybody, when it snows out here and all of a sudden the attendance is higher, and you're like, well, why is that? Because everybody's like, yeah, I'm gonna shovel and I'm gonna make it through the snow and I'm gonna be at work early. And in other places, it's like, oh, a little bit difficult. I guess I'm gonna quit. There's a certain tenacity in that, but I wouldn't say it's stubbornness.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to watch our time, but do you have any...
See, we have 3 minutes left. It's been 3 minutes for 10 minutes.
3 minutes the whole time. That's a ploy that we use to keep people going. In the last few minutes, any advice for UVM as someone looking for that ecosystem, for those partners, for that state? We're already working well together on some things. What's the thing that we're not seeing? I'm in the Office of Research. We worry about IP. We have the internship program through the Office of Engagement. What are we not seeing?
I don't think there's much you're not seeing, but I think there's things that you have the opportunity that you're already doing that we should do more of. And the university uniquely has this neutral position to be able to assemble and then disseminate information and resources to leverage the heck out of Vermont's brand. When we had breakfast with a couple other folks that lead businesses here, it immediately clicked to me that, man, I'm getting way more out of this than anybody else at the table. And I hope they were thinking the same thing. And it was just a really microcosm of assembling a few people together and trading ideas on what it means to be a people-centric business. That was a topic of discussion, right? So I think the university can you guys think a lot. You sit in rooms and think, right? Isn't that what you do here? No.
I mostly do email.
So you email, whatever. You think through those blue tubes over our head. But so the university can be a centralized point for this by assembling people like this together. I hope somebody somewhere here got something out of this talk, and you're like, oh, I'll take that point and that point, and those 15 were stupid, but at least I got 2 out of there. And assembling people like this, assembling people through all different types of media and ideas, and bringing that to graduate and undergraduate classes, that these are the things that it means to be kind of a brand around Vermont, and that pragmatism, that realism. I'll tell you one more quick story from the Paris Air Show yesterday. I walked in and I see the CEO of GE Aviation. These are the folks that make 65% of the world's engines. Huge, successful part of GE. And I start talking to him. We're having this great conversation. Finally, he's like, oh, you're the Beta guy. And he goes, I haven't heard a bad thing about you. And there's, not me, but about Beta. And what he was basically saying with that is that we're in this little tech industry, and I don't care if you're making semiconductor testers or a device that diagnoses every disease from blood. The reality is that if you do things and you build a foundation, you're real and honest. If you if those little tricks not saying stuff that you're going to do but just talk about what you've already done, it phase lags you a little bit, and it penalizes you on some fronts. But what it does is it builds a very strong foundation as being the truth teller in your industry, being the pragmatic solution finder, being the thoughtful company that cares about their people. People ask me why I took a 75-year lease over at the airport, because we're in it. What put a couple $100 million into a sustainable building? We're in it. We're not just trying to pump and dump something out. And so then you get into whatever industry the business enters, whether it's medical or aerospace or whatever, and you become in time, it's taken us 7 years, to establish this position of leadership through pragmatism, real world stuff, telling the truth. And now you've got the CEO of arguably the most successful aerospace company out there, and I know GE has failed in other places, but that's one place where they've really shined, saying, yeah, we want to be more like you guys. And what is he really saying there? We want a brand that is respected and thoughtful, and multidimensionally thoughtful. And so I think that here at the university, we can recognize that and know that the world cares about it, know that investors care about it, and they call it all different things: ESG, sustainability, energy transition, social impact investing, whatever it is. It's something that Vermont has now, and we should take that ball and run with it more. And the university has a phenomenal position to pull people together to make that happen.
Kyle Clark, thank you very much.